Welcome back to Power Lunch. The president signing an executive order just a few hours ago aimed at lowering prescription drug costs in America. He says he's setting a 30-day deadline for drug makers to comply. And if significant progress isn't made, further action will be taken to lower prices within 6 months. In a Truth Social post, Trump claimed drug prices will be cut by 59%. White House officials haven't disclosed which medications this order would apply to. Pharma stocks were hammered in early trading, but some names are clawing back, with the XLV ETF even now in the green. Jeff Jonas is a portfolio manager at Gabelli Funds. You specialize in healthcare, maybe pharma, Jeff, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe you can tell us what exactly this order is going to do. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Despite all the fanfare, this is really just the start of what's probably going to be a lengthy process. So as you hinted, in the next 30 days, he's going to lay out his list of demands to many of the big pharma companies and probably biotech companies. And then they'll have at least 6 months to respond. And as we've seen before, he can be very flexible in what he determines to be a win. So I think they'll be able to come to a relatively acceptable bargain here.
But when we talk about, there's a lot of big reactions, Jeff, to this announcement, with a lot of people, again, pointing to how the Republican president is doing something that seems more out of a Democratic playbook. And this goes back to Trump's first administration. I believe the Biden administration carried it on to some extent or was defeated in courts in trying to do so. So what can the president do now exactly?
A lot of this is jawboning, but he would like to see European countries pay higher prices for their medicine, in part to help pay their costs of some of the research and development costs and the industry profits. And he'd like to see us pay lower costs. He also talked a lot about the middlemen, the pharmacy benefits managers. There's been a lot of controversy around the high list prices that we have in this country, and then the big but opaque rebates that bring the net price down to something a lot lower than the list price, but something that's very hard for people to see and understand.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, it's Brian. And we should show guys, let's bring up CVS, the pharmaceutical chain, because they also own a big PBM, pharmacy benefit manager. That stock is down 5%. And, the politics, Jeff, aside, because this is kind of Trump channeling Bernie Sanders, right? This is like, we need to lower drug prices and reduce profit margins in the U.S. But on the other side, he's saying, well, Europe needs to pay more. Your job is not to be political. It's to figure out what the balance is. They're going to make more or less money. Do you have any sense of that right now?
I've been a believer in the pharmacy benefits manager model for many years. I think they do bring some important things to the table, like encouraging the use of new generic drugs and setting appropriate copays and really just determining the appropriate use of many of these pharmaceutical drugs. They have been transitioning to more of a transparent fee-based model and away from the rebates and away from some of the hidden fees. So I do think they'll be able to adapt, but they have been whipsawed periodically by different proposed legislation and now executive orders here from President Trump.
One of the questions, Jeff, that came up last hour when we were talking to Jared Holtz was, is it possible that the U.S. is actually hoping that other countries raise the price of their prescription drugs more so than we lower ours? In other words, if we're looking for an equilibrium in what people charge, could that be accomplished? And is that what the pharma stocks are reacting to?
That is certainly one of the things that President Trump wants to see happen. And he's having his Commerce Department and his trade representatives look at some of the practices that these European and other countries do, and any restrictions and trade barriers that they might put into place. He even broached the idea of export restrictions here from the U.S. if they don't help comply. So he'd like to see it, but I do think it's going to be a challenge for many of these European countries to raise their prices. They're struggling to fund a lot of their health systems as it is. They've committed a lot of additional money to defense. And I don't think that leaves a lot of room for them to raise drug prices too much in their countries.
What are your favorite stocks in sort of the space, kind of broadly speaking? And what do you actually expect to come down the pike here? As we just showed Merck, for instance, up 6% and so on. And it just feels like if they're going to potentially be pulling out or capping profits, that pulls money out of R&D. It just lowers the expectations of what shareholders might enjoy in these stocks. So where are the safest or best places to go?
Yeah, one of our largest pharmaceutical positions is AbbVie, and they've gotten through the patent expiration of their biggest drug, Humira. They also have very little exposure to Medicare and Medicaid, a lot less than the industry. And they have a great pipeline of new drugs like Rinvoq and Skyrizi that should get them good growth through the rest of the decade. And you did talk about Merck. We do actually like that stock, although it has underperformed recently. We do think they can switch a lot of their patients on Keytruda to a new subcutaneous formulation that's more convenient for patients and probably will be priced at a slight discount. They also have a great R&D pipeline and have worked well to build their business over the years.
Nice recovery there. Then I guess as a final word, Jeff, you know, you're at a dinner conversation and someone says to you, wow, these drug price controls, let's call them, from the president, huge news, aren't they? Would you say, yes, they are, or no, they aren't?
I would say no, they aren't for now. Again, this is the start of what's going to be a lengthy, 6-month process or longer. I don't think they could come into place until 2027 after the midterm elections. So I think this is a lot of noise, a lot of volatility in the near term, but I think the industry is going to be okay over time.
All right, Jeff, thanks for joining us. Good to see you today.
Thank you.
Jeff Jonas.